I wanted all to ask you all to do questions in case you have any, and after the webinar main part, we will ask our guests to answer them. So no worries, just leave them in chat, please, and I'll then read them out. And now I want to introduce our second speaker, Adam Harris, who will talk about airworthiness and the way aircraft engines are managed. So Adam, hi and welcome.
Thank you very much, Julia, and thank you, Daniel. Firstly, it's a great pleasure to be asked to speak at this webinar. There are lots of equally qualified and probably more qualified people than me to speak in the world, but yeah, it's a particular honour to ask me along today to talk. So I do appreciate that. So really, we're going to talk about engines, and I'm basing this on experience rather than giving you a checklist. This is my personal experience, married, of course, to the actual the regulations and the need to comply with the regulations when we accept an engine either as a new engine or as a used component. And I would say that there are differences and similarities between the two ways we need to approach the airworthiness on an engine. So from a new engine's point of view, one thing I want to stress to you is that don't ever be intimidated when you're accepting a new engine into the fact that it's come from a major manufacturer such as Rolls-Royce or CFM or Pratt & Whitney. These are very big companies, they're good at doing what they do, but you mustn't be put off by the idea that you must check that engine when it comes into your care. And by care I mean as an owner-operator, a leasing company, or a continuing airworthiness manager. You have the obligation to accept that engine and not be swayed or use your judgment to be coloured by the intimidation, if you like, of a large company that knows what it's doing. I've worked for large companies and small companies, OEMs, and they do get it wrong. Humans do make mistakes. So it's very, very important with a new engine particularly that you pay as much attention to it as you would a used engine. One of the things we can look at when we're taking a new engine on is obviously be aware of that human error, particularly when it comes to things like serialized components. It's very, very easy to mix serial numbers up. I'm sure for any of you records people out there, and even if you've not done records before, if you worked with a tech log or worked on aircraft where you're using documentation, it's very easy and possible for serial numbers to get mixed up, particularly if they're similar. For example, a dash 1234 could be written as a dash 1243. It's very easy. So, make these assumptions that these kind of errors can be made, and make sure that you check, and you also confirm at the end of it. So with that kind of thing in mind, what we need to look at with new engines is, of course, that we know that the engine has been given a TCDS, that's the type certificate data sheet that has all the good information about the engine, making sure that it meets the requirements of the design organisation and the regulations to which the engine has been issued its TCDS under. But other things are the logbooks. Very important to look at these to make sure that they've been entered nicely. You've got the benefit, of course, of the new engine is that it's got 0 time on it, so you don't have much history to go on, and hopefully not a lot of bad things could have happened to it. But it's worth looking at all these things: ADs, SPs, modifications, the LLP, hard time, on condition monitoring listings. Make sure that you verify all these and cross-check again with all the documentation that you have to make sure that you're understanding exactly the status of this engine when it comes into service. You also have to look at things like airworthiness limitations on the engine, of course. We have to consider how we're going to get this engine into our AMP. A rework log, if there's any things do happen during the build of an engine that could mean that some components have to be reworked. So it's worth looking at those as well, making sure that there's no airworthiness limitations that are going to be pushed to one side on the back of a rework log. Your manuals and technical information, make sure that they're all up to date, the latest revision. Any subscriptions that you're given by the OEM, make sure that as the camo that you're covering those, you've got access to them because they're very important. And then finally the warranty, more of a commercial consideration than an airworthiness one, but obviously if you're taking charge of the project management of the engine into your organisation, the warranty is worth understanding how that could possibly affect repairs and any claims you make down the line, particularly with any airworthiness issues. So then moving on to used engines. Of course, the risk inherent with the used engines, particularly if it's been changed many times between operators and owners, it's moved between NAAs. So, for example, it started off fitted to an EASA registered aircraft, and then it's come off and it's gone on to an FAA registered aircraft. So we have to be very, very conscious about the effects and all the challenges associated with that. And again, you know, don't accept anything but a full check and confirm on all your documentation. Again, it is human to err, and don't accept that because it's come from a big airline such as British Airways or Lufthansa or Emirates that they're perfect. They make mistakes as well, so don't ever be intimidated by that. Stand your ground. If you have any queries or anything you don't like the look of, you must always go back and try and ascertain the correct information has been given to you. It's very important if you're accepting a used engine that you know, most of the pressure to do it right is going to rest on your shoulders. So it is worth checking these, because a mistake at your particular level as a continuing airworthiness manager or as a member of the airworthiness team is the acceptance of that mistake is going to be costly. Commercially, it could be costly, but also along the line when the feds come in to audit you, you could be in hot water with them as well. So make sure you get that right. So looking at a used engine, and first and foremost, what I would say is that we can't start anywhere with this engine unless we have an accurate and up-to-date total hours and cycles. And these all fit in with what I call the certified statuses that you should get with a new engine. And effectively what these are is declarations from the last operator or the last owner about various things on the engine that are important. I'm not going to draw a big list out again, because that's not the purpose of this webinar. It's just to sort of get you the flavour for what we're talking about here. But the hours and cycles, that's your first point, really. You can't establish anything if you don't know where the hours and cycles are. And again, to err is to human, make sure the hours and cycles are a true reflection. And these statuses should take the form of a well-known kind of set of statements. And they're usually signed by an accountable manager, the CEO, or somebody that has responsibility for the engine. So along with the hours and cycles, we'll have these other statuses, and they could be things like the LLP listing, the hard time component listing, a non-incident accident statement, which verifies the engine has not been in any accident or incident. What I would say about that is it doesn't necessarily include things like in-flight shutdowns, but certainly things like immersion in water. If the aircraft ran off the end of a runway, for example, they would be important enough to put in an accident incident statement. Service bulletins, modifications, again, cross-check, confirm, check, confirm. We also need to look at shop visits. If the engine's several years old or 7,000 cycles, obviously it's going to probably have been through the shop, either as routine or as the event of, for example, an in-flight shutdown or some occurrence where the serviceability of the engine was called into question and it required a shop visit. So the shop visits, what you should be looking at is the actual work scope, and by the work scope, this is what the engine starts its shop visit with. So when it gets in, and then we need to do comparison with the actual work pack. When the engine has been declared serviceable, we need to make sure that the work that we put the engine in for has been undertaken and done correctly. And of course, it's all certified. Any Form 1s are issued with any particular components that were changed, any ADs that were performed, because of course some ADs on engines we can't actually perform them and carry them out until they've gone into the shop, because they're buried inside the engine or they're part of the rotating machinery. So again, we'd be looking at ADs. Another thing to consider with a used engine is an on-off log. You know, where exactly has this engine been in? On a large airline, the engine could have been swapped between many airframes. It could also have spent a period of storage. So we need to know that when the engine was off wing and was being stored, it was actually being stored correctly in accordance with the manufacturer's requirements. has the engine got any open defects on it? Is there a hold list? Has the engine arrived with a pipe missing? You know, these things are worth checking as well. Latest boroscope, the latest MPA ground run, oil consumption, performance trends. These are things that are all worth checking because we need to make sure that we understand the health of our engine as well. A&P considerations, again, we're going to put this engine into our aircraft maintenance program, so we need to make sure that if there's any particular quirks or any differences between this engine and others, that they're called up into the A&P. Another thing might be worth, we tend to not talk about parts too much, but you know, how does your company view PMA parts? And this is the parts that are not actually coming from OEMs. They tend to be not major components, but it's a good thing to try and find out what your company sort of feels about this exposure to PMA parts. And again, the engine manuals, technical information to make sure that they all come, support equipment list, any engine stands, anything that comes as part of ground service equipment, blanks and plugs. Any portion of our non-expired warranty, again, more of a commercial consideration, but you know, it's worth looking at the warranty. Non-expired subscriptions as well, make sure that we've got those. And at the end of the day, what I'd say about both engines is let's not just concentrate on a new engine and a used engine from a records point of view. We have to back this up with a physical inspection. And on that, you can be as easy or as hard as you want to on that, really. What I tend to do with the engines where there's physical inspection is called for, it would be things like verifying the data plate on them, it matches. So on the data plate, typically you'll have the engine type, you'll have the engine serial number, which is very important. You'll have a modification plate. So if, for example, the thrust rating of the engine has been changed, that information should be on there, and that's worth verifying in the logbooks, that's reflective. And also there may be a position for owner's plate, making sure that it's got the correct owner's plate. And then what I tend to do is do a sort of sample inspection of some part numbers and serial numbers. So you can look at things like the pumps. You can look at some of the other items on the QEC there that have got serial numbers. You don't have to do all of them, but it's just a good sense check, really, just to show some diligence there with your physical accounting. And then finally, what I'd say, you know, away from the airworthiness side, because we all have to consider the commercial aspects. Don't forget that the engine, along with the landing gears and probably the APU, is a greater part of the actual value of the aircraft, and that's why it's very important. So not only are we maintaining our engines and looking after the records, we're also making sure that our asset value is maintained, and this gives us better sort of a better feeling for when we want to actually sell that asset. If the records are all up to scratch and we've looked after the engine properly during our period of ownership, then it's going to make a more attractive proposition for someone that's coming to look at the engine when they're considering buying it. So not only are we meeting the obligations through compliance with the airworthiness authorities, but we're also presenting a very sort of a good prospect to any future buyers if we've got the records in hand and they're actually very well maintained. I'd say the engines, you know, that's the big value of an aircraft. The landing gears, alongside the APU as well, make up about sort of 75%, I'd say, of the value of an aircraft. So that's why it's very important. And I think this is why Daniel wanted me to talk about airworthiness, that you know, we have to think not only within the realms of the obligations to airworthiness, but also thinking about the value of that engine throughout its life. So that's about all for me. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm going to pass it back to Julia.